Hello, my name is Brittany Kabinski, and I just want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m., so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on Friday, November 30th, we have our presentation on Growing for Our Future, Linking Agriculture to Economic Development, given by Holly Mattei, Jonathan Ferbrache, and Shane Farnsworth. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box, and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. As you can see, we have quite a few webcasts coming up in the next few months, and we have our preliminary schedule for 2012 out. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcasts and register for your webcast of choice. We are now offering distance education webcasts to help you get your ethics and law credits before the end of the year. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. You can now follow us on Twitter @PlanningWebcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, Friday, November 30th, and then select today's webcast, Growing for Our Future, Linking Agriculture to Economic Development. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are recording today's webcast, and it will be available along with a 6-slide per page PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers for today, Holly Mattei, Jonathan Ferbrache, and Shane Farnsworth. Holly Mattei is the Executive Director of the Fairfield County Regional Planning Commission. She has worked for the Regional Planning Commission in various capacities since 2001 and assisted with the Fairfield County 2002 Development Strategy and Land Use Plan, which places strong emphasis on farmland preservation. Ms. Mattei has expanded upon these 2002 efforts by spearheading Fairfield Growing, an agricultural economic development plan to help promote and increase the production and consumption of locally grown, processed, and distributed foods. As a regional planner, Ms. Mattei understands the importance of agriculture in the county's overall land use patterns and local economy, and she strives to increase the county's efforts in recognizing the agricultural industry when making planning-related decisions. She holds a bachelor's in geography from Miami University and a master of city and regional planning from The Ohio State University. Jonathan Ferbrache is a 1998 graduate of The Ohio State University's Knowlton School of Architecture with a bachelor's of science in landscape architecture. He's a registered landscape architect in the state of Ohio and a certified professional in erosion and sediment control. Jonathan currently works for the Fairfield Soil and Water Conservation District as a resource specialist with a focus on farmland preservation and conservation practices. Jonathan has recently served on the Ohio Department of Agriculture's Ag Viability Task Force and the Farmland Preservation Efficiency Team in 2010. Jonathan currently works with the Coalition of Ohio Land Trusts, serves as an advisor to the Fairfield Land Preservation Association and the Ohio Soil and Water Commission and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Task Force on the delivery of conservation services in the state of Ohio. Jonathan was born and raised in Fairfield County, Ohio. From here, Jonathan desired to transform development patterns and seek opportunities to protect agriculture. Jonathan's career path took him to Smith Group and JJR in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Fanning Howey Associates in Dublin, Ohio, where he designed K-12 school facility sites across the state of Ohio before arriving at the Fairfield Soil and Water Conservation District. Shane Farnsworth was hired in January of 2010 as the Fairfield County Economic Development Director to oversee the county's Enterprise Zone Program, revolving loan program, and administrates the region non-for-profit marketing organization called the Fairfield 33 Development Alliance, and oversees a myriad of economic development projects throughout the county. Prior to that, Mr. Farnsworth was the Director of Planning and Economic Development for Clark County, Ohio, for close to 11 years, where he administered the county's development regulations and an active farmland preservation and agricultural economic development program specific to the region. His experience in land use planning, economic development, and quality of life enhancements allow him to approach economic development from a holistic approach that has proven to be successful time and time again. Shane is a graduate from Hocking College and Wright State University with degrees in wildlife management, geographic information systems, and urban planning. He is also a certified economic development finance professional through the National Development Council. Let's welcome our speakers for today.
Thank you, Brittany. This presentation will focus on the efforts that Fairfield County has taken to preserve our agricultural roots by attempting to increase the production and consumption of local foods. Jonathan, Shane, and I all represent the county in one way or another, and we have recently joined together to promote locally grown foods as a way to both preserve the county's heritage and create business opportunities to our area. We hope to share our efforts with you today, and we hope that you are able to take something back to your community from the lessons that we have learned through our planning process. So those of you who are not from Ohio, I wanted to take a few minutes to give a brief explanation of our geography and demographics. Fairfield County is located in central Ohio, just southeast of Columbus, the state capital of Ohio. Columbus is in Franklin County, and we are the county immediately adjacent to the southeast, as highlighted on the state map on your slide. Fairfield County is 505 square miles, which translates into approximately 323,000 acres. In 2007, the U.S. Census of Agriculture reported that there were approximately 177,000 acres of farmland remaining in our county. So as you can see, that's approximately 50% of our total area. As we continue to lose farmland, the county's population continues to increase as a result of increased development pressures from Columbus. In the 10-year span from 2000 to 2010, Fairfield County grew by approximately 20%. This slide illustrates the number of acres of land developed through the major and minor subdivision process for the last 10 years. Major subdivisions are developments that include new roads and other infrastructure. Minor subdivisions are lot splits under 5 acres utilizing existing rights-of-way and either existing utilities or on-site water and septic systems. As you can see, on average, approximately 800 acres per year were being developed over the last 10 years. I do want to point out 2 anomalies, and that is in 2002. You can see we had almost 2,000 acres of land consumed that year. There was a potential moratorium going on in the city of Pickerington at that time, and developers were recording plats in the mass that year. So that is the reason why that one is a little bit higher than the other ones. And then also I wanted to point out in 2009, even though we had hit the housing crisis and we were in the recession at that point in time, we still lost about 350 acres of land. That is mostly due to 2 schools that were built within our county during that time. Because of all the housing development we experienced in the past, we needed new schools. And there were 2 new schools that came in that time, and that's where most of that acreage is coming in or taken account for in that year. So wanted to point those 2 out. So in the late 1990s, Fairfield County recognized the development pressures that it had been experiencing and understood that these would continue over the next decade. As a result, the Fairfield County Regional Planning Commission completed its first comprehensive plan since 1978. This plan was adopted in 2002, and it includes a series of goals, objectives, and policies for preserving farmland. It identifies urban service areas where infrastructure existed at the time or was planned within the next 20 years. I do want to point out that urban service areas should not be confused with urban growth boundaries that some of you might have terminology out there. Development is not restricted to these areas, but rather the plan recommends that development be focused in these areas. This comprehensive plan also utilizes the LISA model to determine where farmland should be preserved. The LISA model stands for Land Evaluation Site Assessment Model. It is a parcel-by-parcel evaluation that examines the land characteristics, such as soil types and other similar factors. The model then assesses the site characteristics such as the size of the parcel and how close it is to water and sewer services. Each parcel is then assigned a value based on this review. The steering committee then sets policy decisions to determine the thresholds for preserving the land. From this model, it was determined that approximately 140,000 acres of farmland in Fairfield County should be protected. This leads us into the efforts that Fairfield County has taken since the adoption of the 2002 plan to protect our farmland. And for this, I will turn it over to Jonathan Ferbrache to provide a better perspective on the reality of farmland preservation in our county.
Good afternoon. This is Jonathan Ferbrache with Fairfield Soil and Water. And what I wanted to point out is we're basically still at the beginning of efforts to protect our agriculture here in Fairfield County. Only 10 years has passed since we really focused our efforts with the 2002 land use plan. But what we've seen in this period of 10 years following our 2002 land use model is something that is really beginning to define the patterns of development for the future. In the slide that's up in front of you at this point in time, you'll see towards the northwest area, that's where the city of Columbus begins to encroach into Fairfield County. The city of Pickerington and Canal Winchester kind of blur together in the light gray, and then you also notice the dark gray areas along the road frontage. Those are many of those minor subdivisions that Holly spoke of earlier. But as we begin to look at the process, we've developed a conservation community that stretches across our northeast area. This region also encompasses nearly 8 villages, and by the way, I say nearly, we have one that is no longer incorporated and never was large enough, but there are 8 villages within this area that previously served the canal system and the railroad system. So as we move forward, that is going to be very challenging for us to work with the urban service areas around those villages, but try to protect the best prime farm ground. We've also seen a strong interest in applications for farmland preservation in our southwest corner. And then as we look at the geography of Fairfield County, just below Lancaster begins the foothills of the Appalachians. This is sort of that rock, and Columbus is kind of our hard place in between. We are looking to develop that corridor along US 33, a major corridor for commerce moving from the Ohio River into Columbus. And as you note, I-70, Interstate 70, runs north of us in Licking County and briefly dips into Fairfield County. So as we look at our patterns, these are very much the areas that we're going to focus our attention during the next 10 years. But with the development that we've seen over the past couple years, we need to stop and look at some of the tools that we've used to try and curtail it. About the same time that we started our land use planning efforts here in Fairfield County, the state of Ohio recognized that they needed to be doing something from a higher elevation. And that's when Governor Voinovich launched this Farmland Preservation Task Force. And from that, we developed the Clean Ohio Farmland Preservation Program, along with several other programs to protect green space. Fairfield County stands out as a leader from a county-based effort to protect farmland. Here in the state of Ohio, we have many land trusts with large service boundaries that conduct a lot of the farmland preservation work. But Fairfield County is driven at the county level, strongly supported by our commissioners, and they are the ones that actually deliver the applications to the state for the Clean Ohio Agriculture Easement Purchase Program. We also partner with them and the Ohio Department of Agriculture and the USDA NRCS for the Farm and Ranch Lands Protection Program, as well as the Grasslands Reserve Program. Now, some folks that don't understand what the Grassland Reserve Program is, that is basically trying to retain properties with grass cover for hay, grazing, as well as wildlife. And as we look at the diversity of food we want to consume in the future, making sure that if people want grass-fed beef, that we have the ability to provide that to them here in Fairfield County. But over that period of 10 years, we've basically seen 8,000 acres apply for protection through these programs, but only 2,676 acres were accepted for a value of about $4.2 million. We never see prices above $2,000 an acre for these programs, and most landowners are giving up well beyond 60% of the development value. We've also been working very strongly here in Fairfield County with our land trusts and associations. The Fairfield Soil and Water Board, along with the Regional Planning Commission, helped develop a local land trust that we currently provide guidance to, the Fairfield Land Preservation Association, along with 2 other groups working in neighboring counties that have protected property here. There are currently 703 acres of easements that have been donated here in Fairfield County, and we have seen a majority of these easements directly beside the municipal limits, and that's where the reference to the urban service areas comes in. As the programs that the state has developed and the federal government have developed don't necessarily reward protection beside those existing service areas. So if there are interested landowners that want to protect a piece of property because of unique wildlife habitat or some historical component, then working with the land trust meets that goal. But our goal here is to make sure that we are all aware as to what's happening, and that's where our office at Soil and Water becomes involved. We currently operate with a memorandum of understanding for the Fairfield Land Preservation Association to do much of the secretarial work and coordination, and we provide a phone for people to call and talk and look at their options. We've also utilized the Agricultural Security Area program, and it has basically been a learning curve for us. There aren't a whole lot of these out there, and we were trying to use them to the fullmost intent of the law. Our agricultural security area exists between the 3 villages that used to operate for the railroad and the canal systems here in central Ohio. As you look at the map in front of you, up against the village of Millersport, there is a dark red area. That's a property that was donated to a local land trust. But the area that has been hatched in the blue and white, that represents the agricultural security area, and the red are those properties that are permanently protected under easements or have easements pending on them. So about 1,200 acres came in about 3 years ago into this program, and we were able to actually carry this forward as a test for the rest of the state. We believe that we are one of the only counties utilizing ASAs to protect areas for a period of 10 years from additional sewer, water, and road development. But also, the property on the southern end was one of the first in the state to utilize the tax exemption for new agricultural real property as they look to expand their grain capacity as well as their drying capacity for their corn and soybean operation. Now, we look back over 10 years and we think we've had great success with the number of acres that we've protected, the applications that we have, and but we stop and look at it, and that decline that we've seen over the last 20 years, we can't compete with that. And even during the last 5 years, as the housing boom has slowed down, even with our efforts to protect 2 or 3 farms a year, we have been basically converting twice the number of acres that we've been able to protect during that same period of time. A lot of folks have also made comments over the years that yields and technology will increase our production. Well, even if we stop and figure in what that production increase has been over the last 20 years, we anticipate by about the year 2050, we would not have the land base to support what our current production levels are if we keep consuming the acreage that we have been consuming over the last 20 years. Now, Fairfield County stands as a strong grassroots effort from the Soil and Water Board, the Regional Planning Commission, strong support of our County Farm Bureau, and our county commissioners. But that wasn't enough. We needed to stop and look for all those other opportunities, because if we can't protect enough farm ground to stay one step ahead of it, we have to protect the industry. And that's where the last 5 years has also brought renewed support, as well as new support from the Lancaster-Fairfield Chamber of Commerce, Main Street Lancaster, which is focusing on the redevelopment of downtown. We all put 2 and 2 together and realized that if we redevelop downtown and supported the redevelopment activities, then we could turn the tide potentially against development here in Fairfield County. We also have the strong support of Fairfield County Economic Development, which is again strongly supported by our county commissioners. And when we put all those things together, the effort to protect all of our soil and water resources and our ability to sustain the demand for food here in Fairfield County takes us to that point that we can begin to grow Fairfield County agriculture. For those of you that are not familiar with Fairfield County, we are primarily a corn and soybean county. We have a strong beef herd population. We have a moderately sized dairy operation with 1 organic dairy at this time. And we have about 4 major orchards that are still family run here. There used to be several large orchards that were operated by the Ohio State University, but Ohio State gave those up many years ago. Some of those are still in production under private efforts at this point in time. But we've also seen some of these smaller operations and the emergence of small vineyards, which we have not seen in years on some of those smaller properties. One of the things that we would like to accomplish, and Holly will hint at this later, is we would like to return underutilized lands to production. We would like to see us increasing our acres in agriculture. At this moment in time, I'm going to turn it back over to Holly to take you into the next step of growing Fairfield County's agriculture.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Jonathan did speak about the partnerships that we had formed, and it's the partnerships between our economic development leaders and farmland preservation advocates that led us to pursue Fairfield Growing, which is the economic development plan that we have just recently completed and adopted. This plan was made possible through a grant that the Regional Planning Commission received from the Ohio State University's Center for Farmland Policy Innovation. And again, it seemed like it was the perfect storm for us to pursue this plan. Not only did our 2002 land use plan call for further study of our agricultural support industries, but the local food movement was continuing to gain momentum. The Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, which we call MORPC, also completed a local food assessment plan for our 12-county region, which included Fairfield County. We wanted to build upon this broader planning effort and focus on what we could do at a county level to keep our farmers farming. In Ohio, there's a $107 billion food and agricultural industry. We wanted to find a way that we could keep these dollars in the state and more specifically keep our local dollars in Fairfield County. This led us to continue to build our partnerships throughout the region, including the Ohio State University. We were able to partner with Ohio State to have a city and regional planning class write the plan for us, and then the grant that we received allowed the RPC to hire an intern to act as a liaison between the planning efforts that we were doing here locally and the plan writing that was taking place back on OSU's campus. The plan would not have been made possible either without the efforts of the Economic Development Department, our Chamber of Commerce, our Soil and Water District, Main Street Lancaster, and the Ohio State University, as I've mentioned before. We also needed, to form an advisory board to help lead us through the planning process. We've formed this board by sending out a survey to various stakeholders, which included producers, processors, and retailers that included institutional uses, local grocers, and restaurants. There were 3 different surveys that we sent to each of those groups, but on each of the surveys, at the end of them, we asked if the person or company would be interested in serving on the advisory board for this plan. From these surveys, we were able to form our board. And as you can see, we had a broad spectrum of advisory board members. This helped to create diverse conversations that led us through the core issues at hand. One other point of interest is that there were many stakeholders, mostly in the retail sector, that were not able to attend monthly meetings. In these cases, we conducted one-on-one interviews with these individuals that were scheduled at the convenience of the stakeholder. We tried to be as accommodating as possible to get the most participation. So I would encourage you, as you are doing your own planning efforts, to find some way to accommodate your stakeholders beyond the normal monthly planning meetings that most of us are familiar with. We also took a very short planning process, and we tried to coordinate this planning process around the producers, our farmers' schedules, and make sure that we weren't interfering with their planting and with their harvest season. So we started off in February with our monthly meetings. In that meeting, we went just through an introduction of what we were trying to accomplish, and we drafted goals and objectives that later went into the plan. Then in March, we had our March meeting very early in March, and we used that meeting to identify the barriers that our producers were experiencing in getting their food to the processors and the retailers for our end users. And we did make sure that we did that early in March again to avoid that planting season as best that we could. Then in April, we started to identify the barriers from our retailers and processors. We lumped that into one meeting so that those two could talk more one-on-one. And then in May, we had draft recommendations back from the OSU. So after our March and April meetings, our liaison took those barriers back to OSU, and that class was able to draft recommendations for us to consider, and then we went through our May meeting and whittled through each of them. We tweaked them, or we took some out, we added some, etc. Then by June, we had a draft plan that was presented to us from OSU. And from there, we tweaked it just minor, and in July, our advisory board was able to recommend that we start the adoption process of the plan, and that started in, took place in August and September, and was finally adopted by the county commissioners at the end of September. So what does this plan include? Well, first of all, there were 4 major goals that were identified during our planning process. They're listed up on your screen, and the first and most important one that we got out of our advisory group was public education. We heard that from all 3 sectors, no matter if it was a farmer, a processor, or a retail entity. People need to understand the what local foods, what benefits they have, and how to obtain them, and even how to cook them is what we heard some people say. And so education was one of the biggest goals that we heard. Then the next 2, increasing local demand and increasing local supply. We had a rather in-depth conversation on those, and some believe that we need to increase our demand before we increase our supply. Some believe that we have enough supply, but we need to increase our demand, so, and vice versa. So it's which one do you believe is what it came down to. And so those 2 go hand in hand, but ultimately we need to look at both. And then finally, Jonathan touched on this slightly in his presentation, but we wanted to look at preserving our farmland, and not only preserving the large tract of lands, but how do we grow upon our underutilized land, our 5 and 10 acres that have been converted. How do we bring some of that back into production for specialty crops, etc.? So those are the 4 broad goals and objectives that we identified during this planning process. So how do we go about attaining these goals? Well, we started by identifying the barriers that our producers, processors, and retailers have experienced in trying to get the local food from the farm to the table. And as you can see through these slides, I'm just going to flip through them because there are a lot of similar barriers that each of the groups identified. And we've talked about it here. It's probably similar barriers that any of these entities are going to find across the nation. They're very similar, and the biggest ones being awareness and convenience. Those are big concerns. And then from our farmers' perspective and our retailers' perspective, no aggregation. We don't have a place where we can take our products and aggregate them and get them out to our retail entities in larger quantities. So that was one of the big barriers that we saw as we were going through our planning process. So once we identified the barriers, as I said, we received the recommendations back from Ohio State, and there were over 50 recommendations that ended up in our plan to help create a local food economy. These recommendations fall within 8 broad categories that are shown on this slide. However, I believe that there are 2 main themes coming out of this plan. They are the creation of a local food council and the development of an aggregation facility. The local food council will create a network that will allow for collaboration between all levels of the food system, and also be an impetus for implementing the other recommendations of this plan. The aggregation facility will bring together producers to achieve the economies of scale and to provide the quantity, quality, and consistency demanded by the market for locally grown, processed, and distributed foods. From this, we have started to take a look at our next steps. And as you can see here, the third bullet point says central location. And one of the things that came out of this plan was that we need to have an aggregation facility that is centrally located. So we're currently working with Main Street Lancaster to come up with funding to look into a feasibility study of creating an aggregation facility in downtown Lancaster. So as we pursue that funding, we're hoping to have something sooner rather than later so that we can look into identifying a site and then possibly how do we go about implementing that in the future. There are many other recommendations that came out of this plan, and all of them are very relevant, and some of them are short-term and some of them are much longer-term. But as we go through this, I think it's very important that we have a marketing perspective and that we have someone that can go out and start to show others what Fairfield County has to offer in the local food industry. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shane to talk about economic development opportunities in Fairfield County through the local food momentum. So Shane, it's over to you.
Thanks, Holly. This is Shane Farnsworth. I'm the Director of Economic Development in Fairfield. Holly, am I there? Hello?
You're there.
Okay, here we go. This is Shane Farnsworth. I'm the Economic Development Director for Fairfield County. And a lot of communities, when you're looking at farmland preservation, you're looking at agriculture, it seems like that group of individuals that are passionate about that, you tend to not see economic development and the business community involved. And unfortunately, I see that as a missed opportunity from my perspective, because although you have people that are very passionate about farmland preservation and preserving that way of life, it also is a business. It's an agribusiness and even agri-industry when you look at all of the aspects and even the diversity of agriculture in our world today. And so one of the things that we were looking at from an economic development approach is really who are we as a community. And so we took a step back and really began to look at what our resources are in Fairfield County, but also in central and southeastern Ohio. We are kind of on that cusp between Columbus and very urban, highly populated region, and then to the southeastern, a very rural, wooded Appalachian foothills environment. And both regions really lend themselves to bringing their own unique strengths to the table. And because of our location, we can take advantage of both of those. And so we looked at that, looking at our infrastructure. And what I mean by that is our roads, our water and sewer within our municipalities. I think it's important that our municipalities and our townships and counties work together, and really the individuals and organizations that are pro farmland preservation also need to be pro urban development and really need to help support our municipalities for redevelopment and infill development where the infrastructure is. It's a lot easier to really focus on our maximizing our infrastructure inside our urban environments versus just annexing and growing outward and outward. We are looking at our workforce. What kind of skill sets do we have? Our state workforce development organization has been and is continuing to be a real tool for us. And when we ask those questions about whether we're dealing with any different layer of agriculture that is out there, whether it's general laborers all the way up to doing high technology, when you're dealing with a lot of the biosciences, a lot of the biomedicals, where many of those base elements are grown, or could be grown right in your community or within your region. And so identifying what that workforce is, technology, location, obviously for logistics, and that's going to be different from every community. But we also looked at industry clusters and what kind of food processing companies did we already have? What kind of growers did we already have that we could help either strengthen them or actually help to diversify and build upon those? One of the areas when it comes to industries within our community is the glass industry. And so that is kind of one of our targeted industries. I mean, not looking at agriculture, but that have a workforce that understand glass, that understand the technologies and have that knowledge base that other companies that are in the glass industry know that if they were to move into our area within our region, that there's a workforce that understands glass. So through that, first we need to identify who we are, what our strengths are. We didn't want to be focusing on fish farming if we didn't have a volume of high quality water that these fish farmers could go after. So we needed to know who we are. Go ahead, you go to the next slide, Holly. You can go ahead to the next slide.
I'm trying.
Okay.
No, we can't do it. It's not letting me, Shane. If you just want to talk.
Well, one of the
there
things.
we go.
Hey, well, there we go. One of the things that we found out of really identifying what our strengths are, then we needed to look at, okay, who are our partners? And honestly, what we were finding is there were organizations and there were people and business leaders in our community that were coming out of the woodwork. When they really begin to understand this whole Grow Fairfield County and this local food movement and really supporting local agribusinesses, they were coming out of the woodwork. And we couldn't quite understand it. We realized that how are these businesses utilizing agriculture? How could they be utilizing agriculture? Our Chamber of Commerce, they are, and we have 5 Chamber of Commerce in Fairfield County, which can be a blessing and a curse at times. But what was important is that they are very much connected in the business community, the restaurateurs, and the different businesses in our community from the standpoint of being able to connect with them and being able to have those conversations. For example, our local hospital, some of our locally owned restaurants, for someone that is not familiar, if they're not familiar with who you are, they may be skeptical if you want to go talk to them about local foods. Whereas if you are partnered with your local Chamber of Commerce and they're in support of this and they're talking to this local restaurateur, that there's an existing relationship, that was a tremendous resource. The economic development organizations in our community were a great asset in identifying what those needs are. But even some of our government organizations, like our local Port Authority, one of the projects that we were working on the side was a transload facility, a local rail spur. And what we are seeing now is one of the big users are our local growers and local farmers, and even some of our food processors in either shipping in product, those base products via rail, but also shipping either products they're growing or shipping products out to their customers in a much cheaper fashion because the cost of energy is going to continue to rise. And so we're looking at ways of how we can improve and make our local growers more competitive. And our local Port Authority will charge a user of our transload facility like $100 for a rail car. And so it's really, the intent is how can we make this tool usable for all of, whether you're hauling steel or you're hauling popcorn, that how can you use this to the best of your advantage. Our transportation improvement districts, our community improvement corporations, there are other government economic development organizations, and how can they play a part in working with our business attraction and really focusing on those targeted industries. And being those partnerships, because many times a lot of these organizations that are pro-business, there's still a connection that can be made with pro-farmland preservation, and it's a matter of looking at it from the standpoint of agriculture and agribusiness and agri-industry. And then the business-to-business opportunities is who's buying. If you're talking to these restaurant owners, where are you buying your tomatoes? Where are you buying your lettuce? Where are you buying your chicken? Where are you buying your beef? And how can we make those connections and really connect the restaurant owners with the local producers and really get out of the way? Let them have those conversations, do the negotiations of price. Let them deal with that, but how do we make those connections? Some of the things that we learned when it comes to education was educating even the farmers, that they understand that you can't just put any old tomato on a salad and serve it to a customer in a restaurant, that there's a level of quality that has to be attained, and making sure that those growers understand it. And that was something that new that came out of this whole process, is that all three levels, from growers to processors to those retailers, whether it is the major grocery stores or it's a local restaurant or just a local retailer, is making sure that they understand the needs of each other and making it making those lines of communication, really strengthening those and being that conduit to help those. And you can go ahead, Holly, to the next one. When it comes to our industry base, I make the joke that we see some communities, they're kind of a one-trick pony. They have one egg in their basket, and when that industry is doing well, they're doing great. When that industry isn't doing well, watch out. And we have communities around Ohio that have one egg in their basket, and we've really focused in our community to try to diversify our industry base. And with agribusiness and agri-industry, that's one more targeted industry that we're focusing on, of how to diversify who we are as a community. Farmers markets are a great tool. I kind of view them as a small business incubator. I try to reach out to all of our vendors throughout the county and all the different farmers markets that we have, and reach out to them and make sure that we can help them from a small business perspective, and to say, okay, you've got your stand, you're hanging your shingle at this farmer's market. How can we get you into a storefront? What's it going to take to get you to that next level? And many times it's not so much the physical investment. It's developing the business plan, finding those clientele to make sure that, okay, now that we have this additional cost because we have an address for this business, okay, who are we willing to sell to? We need to make sure that we are identifying those future customers for these small businesses, and those businesses could be wholesale or they could be retail. How do we do this, and how do we strengthen? Because many times they have a desire, they have this passion for growing these products or making and baking these products, but then how do you sell it? And how do you sell it in quantities that's going to be worth your while? And what kind of equipment are you needing? So we're looking at small business development and looking at the federal programs through SBA, looking at the state programs here in Ohio, but even what local programs that we have, and even looking at our regulatory environment, really encouraging our municipalities to make it easier to build or redevelop in the downtown, your downtown, than it is out in a greenfield site or out in a strip mall someplace. And really look at our regulations, look at our incentive packages that are in place. How can we simplify them? How can we make them try to encourage people? We even reached out to our banks. Our Main Street Lancaster program reached out on their own and talked to the local banks and said, how can we help from a lending perspective? And so they actually, there were 4 or 5 banks that set aside money at an extremely low interest rate to help landowners in the downtown area, but even businesses to invest in the downtown area. So, it's not just, okay, you're looking to get your business started, great, wonderful, God be with you, have fun. It's how can we help you from the standpoint of with equipment, with financing, with business development plans, even marketing. And what you're going to find is there are tools and resources in your community. And for example, with marketing, when we're talking to these small business owners saying, there are marketing firms here in our community. I'm not going to recommend one over the other, but here's a list of who does small business marketing that I would encourage you to at least have a conversation to that way, look at how that is taken care of, looking at the small business development centers here in Central Ohio and how they've been a tremendous resource in developing those business plans that ultimately will go to a bank and say, I need this much money to get this business started. And we are also looking at our, working with our existing businesses from a retention and expansion perspective. How can we, what do you do? And then how can we take that and look at how can we diversify? Are you aware of what's these other activities that are going on here in Fairfield County, but even in Central Ohio? And maybe we can help to diversify, because we've seen a lot of working with a lot of companies that, they're seeing more activity, they're seeing more action happen, and how do they get into that? And in our area, we do have some food processors. We have a lot of metal fabricating and a lot of machining companies, and so and polymers. And so we're looking at how we can even diversify them in providing products that maybe are dealing with food grade polymers and products. So it's looking beyond just growing of the produce, growing of the livestock, but how are those jobs, how are those processing jobs being created, and are they created in your community? You can have an apple orchard, but if you're making something out of those apples within your community, that's where real job opportunities are happening, and that's something your Chamber of Commerce and your ED officials are they're gonna latch onto, and they're going to want to take advantage of. And so that's one of the angles that we really, when we reached out to our chambers and even our downtowns to say, we need a landing zone for these companies if and when they come. And that's where our downtown, our Main Street programs really, and our municipalities jumped on that. Let's prepare areas for a landing zone for these small businesses. Where are these jobs going to be? We need people to fill these positions. So we even reached out to our local colleges and technical schools and say, do we have the workforce to be able to fulfill these needs? And the state and our local universities were a great resource, and even to look at specific pieces within that workforce. So we can talk about a little bit about what we have done, but I think it's more important is trying to throw some ideas out to you and let you think about, look at the different tools and resources you have within your community, know thyself, and then really go after those targeted industries. A lot of marketing plans are more of a shotgun approach, and it really will help I feel it's helped us in identifying, well, what do you have by way of infrastructure or location? What are your strengths? And what kind of companies or industries need those strengths? Then go after those industries, go after those kinds of things. You can move forward, Holly. And the specific in your message, and I think the thing is know thy audience. It seems like those two groups, the pro-farmland preservation versus pro-business, it seems like they don't always see eye to eye. But you know what? We don't have to agree on everything. We can agree on certain things and just agree to disagree on other pieces. But by promoting agriculture, by promoting those agribusinesses and industries, I've kind of said, how can we make those connections? And then the growers understanding the needs of the retailers, and understanding the needs of the public. I'm not going to go into a grocery store and buy a bunch of nasty-looking tomatoes. We need to make sure that the quality is there, but also when that demand is happening, and that collaboration even between the growers to say, I've only got 2 crates of tomatoes today, but this other neighbor that's growing tomatoes, he's got crates and he'll sell it to you. And developing those types of things, we see is a real resource and opportunity of connecting our growers to our local retailers and even the general public. And then looking at your large institutions, talking to your local school districts, talking to universities, talking to the prison systems, talking to the hospitals, some of the major employers. Some of the things we found is a few of our companies provide meals as a benefit to their employees. Where are you buying your food? Not to say that you have to buy 100% local. You may not be able to do that, but how can we begin to transition into that? Currently working with a company that deals and processes potatoes. Well, where are you buying your potatoes? Well, they're buying them from outside of Ohio. How can we transition and connect you with Ohio potato growers, whether they're in Fairfield County or in Central Ohio or Ohio, and transition to buying Ohio potatoes? It's those kinds of things, is how do we make those connections? And it's really, with the number of organizations that are out there, it's truly surprising the number of partnerships that you're going to have. I encourage you to look at agriculture as an industry, no different than manufacturing, no different than high-tech or biohealth, and treat it as such, and from business attraction, but also retention and expansion. And it's going to help your community, your region, and your tax base when it comes to this fluctuating economy we've been living in. I think it will help to, as you get those victories and get those expansions and growing, that there are going to be some real opportunities in diversifying your workforce and your industry force.
Thank you, Shane. I think that concludes our presentation, Brittany, if we want to move into questions and answers.
All right, sounds good. So our first question comes in from Daniel. How many ranch and farm owners, number of acres, have petitioned for the Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program?
I didn't hear the entire part, Brittany. Please repeat that.
Sure. How many ranch and farm owners, number of acres, have petitioned for the Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program?
Right now, I would estimate that we have about 1,000 acres that have gone into that program. Fairfield County does not have a direct funding source that we put up for the 25% match required. We have relied on the Ohio Department of Agriculture's Clean Ohio Fund to provide us with that match that also stretches the state dollar further in protection.
Okay, great. Our next question comes in from Jessica. Could you please explain what an agriculture security area is?
The general premise of the agricultural security area is not permanent protection, but it is a land use planning tool to try and make sure that we are guiding utilities and roads into areas that we do not want to protect as agriculture long term. So the primary driver is intelligent land use up front, and then trying to protect the land permanently inside that agricultural security area. It's required here in the state of Ohio to utilize the law that the counties and townships and adjacent municipalities within a set distance weigh in on whether or not they want to create an agricultural security area. The agricultural security area we have here in Fairfield County just recently went through what would probably be the first major challenge in the state of Ohio, with 2 municipalities on either side. We had clearly communicated with them at the beginning that if they had any objections, we needed to know. But at that time, they did not have a water line plan in place. And one village provided water to another, and then the village further to the north said, we can provide you water as well. And they went through an effort to run a water line directly through the agricultural security area. We were unable to utilize any existing law to stop that moving forward in our review, but basically when it was all said and done, our County Farm Bureau stepped in and negotiated between the villages to find a means by which no water line would have to be run and be more economical to either village. So what it really did was foster that communication between villages on either side of the agricultural area as to what the importance of agriculture is and what the agricultural community can do to help preserve your bottom line as you operate your villages.
Okay. Our next question comes in from Heather. What does an aggregation facility look like? Is it a large farmer's market?
What we are envisioning through this process is that it would include both wholesale and a retail component. It would be something that would be inside. So typically farmers markets, when I think of those, are more outside. This would be something at a larger scale inside, where there could be such things as a produce auction or some kind of wholesale distribution, so that farmers can aggregate their products and then send them to larger institutions. But coupled with that is a retail component, which you might think more of a farmer's market type thing, where people can come in and purchase directly from the entities at those booths. And it has been discussed that our current farmers market in Lancaster, if we were able to get an aggregation facility going, it could move into that facility on a permanent basis, rather than closing down our one of our streets on Wednesday afternoons and Saturday mornings. So yes, partly there'll be a farmers market component, but something larger and something with a wholesale component to it.
All right. Our next question comes in from Leanne. Did you have to make any changes to your subdivision ordinances for land outside of your service area to discourage or redesign residential development to help protect farmland?
Subdivision regulations are pretty much governed from the enabling legislation at the state level. So there is not much that we can do through the subdivision regulations. But what you can do is have, through zoning, do some different amendments to that to make sure that we're zoning in the proper locations for development, and then also looking into zoning that can protect agriculture in the areas where we want agriculture to remain.
I think one of the things that's very important here in Fairfield County still is the land rights. And one of the nice things that we've been able to do in Fairfield County is, if someone does desire to build a subdivision, and it's also beside a farm that is already protected, the people still have that choice. But what we have seen primarily as the driver is, when one neighbor gets a farm protected, the next neighbor takes interest. And we now have these conservation communities of, maybe 6 to 8 farmers that farm 60-acre tract here, 100-acre tract a mile down the road. Their neighbor has one another quarter mile. We begin to create this continuous network, and there is a strong energy that flows with that when you talk to those neighbors in those neighborhoods about what's happening.
Okay, our next question comes in from Anne, and it's sort of related to the last question. When a farm property that is among the 140,000 acres targeted for preservation comes up for review for subdivision or development, what is the county's response?
Typically, when it's coming through a rezoning recommendation, we will take a look at our land use plan, and if it is within that agricultural preservation area, we typically will recommend disapproval. Our county plan is at a county level. The zoning in Fairfield County is administered at a township level. So we have, through Ohio law, the right to and responsibility of making a recommendation back to the township, but it's ultimately up to the township to make that final rezoning decision. So we will recommend it against it, but it does not necessarily mean that it always follows suit through that whole process. Now, that's up from the zoning side. Subdivision regulations, we administer that at a county level, but again, if a property is zoned that would allow for the subdivision, our subdivision regulations would only regulate how that land gets subdivided and the type of infrastructure, the specifications for the infrastructure. It's not going to allow us to stop the development and just tell them what size lots, etc.
Great. Our next question comes in from George. It kind of goes back to the aggregation facility. Is there any data available yet to document the effectiveness of your programs on creating the connections between local growers and retailers and/or in getting an aggregation facility plan and project implemented?
At this point in time, since we just wrapped up the plan a few months ago, we do not have that type of data. But one thing that we have seen out of interest is there's an Amish population within Fairfield County that has great interest in moving forward with some type of aggregation, and they are moving forward doing their own legal review as to what they would need to do to help propel the effort. Along with our Main Street Lancaster and Regional Planning has submitted to the Ohio Farm Bureau Foundation for a grant to begin that feasibility study of the downtown area and what can be done. But right now we are very optimistic based on the success we've had with farmland preservation and the desire to keep agriculture in our community. The numbers will begin to appear in a few short years as to what our true success has been.
Okay, our next question comes in from Heather. Any specific plans for utilizing the smaller lots and getting them back into production? Are there any incentives?
At this point in time, again, just because we have the short planning effort underway, we do not have incentives, but what we are trying to do is beginning to get with some of our township representatives, especially up there towards the Columbus area, and let them know that this is something we have interest in doing. What we don't want to do is change the plan that may already be in place for that property, so we're just really trying to wade into it. But we've also seen as some of these larger farms were divided over the previous decade, many of those property owners realized quickly that the maintenance of that 10 to 15 acres was unreasonable, and the taxation that they were being taxed at was higher than they wanted. So they chose to move in the direction of engaging in some type of agriculture to meet our current agriculture use valuation tax. So we've already seen the development of a handful of shrimp ponds on several parcels, along with the vineyard development on, I believe, 3 parcels here in Fairfield County that were all of that relatively small nature.
Okay. Our next question comes in from Anne. What has been the role of the County Extension Office, and also address the state extension program's involvement if there is any?
With our efforts at this point in time, the Fairfield County Extension Office did weigh in as one of our advisory members. Right now, they are doing many of their own programs, and because of financial challenges within their offices and transitioning folks, they were not able to be at the table with us throughout this entire process. But again, they had an active role in moving it forward. And then, of course, the OSU partnership that we had does tie back to OSU Extension indirectly, and I'll let Holly speak to that relationship.
The grant that we got from OSU was through the Center of Farmland Policy Innovation. So we were able to work directly with OSU through this planning process, and Jill Clark with the center was part of our planning process and did attend our meetings and provide input throughout our planning process. So there was a close connection with Ohio State at many different levels through the policy Center of Farmland Policy Innovation, through our extension office, through the city and regional planning program who wrote the class for us. So I think that they were pretty heavily involved throughout.
Now, as we move forward, we fully anticipate that Lancaster's office here, the Fairfield OSU Extension, will take a role in some of these education and health components that we've partnered with the hospital. But right now, we're still moving forward in our own internal planning processes to take this to the next level.
Okay. Our next question comes in from Heather. You show senators and congressmen on your policy committee. What has been their involvement and how supportive have they been?
It's been very great. They came at their own will to these meetings, and they have shown a strong interest in our plan. And both Austria's office and Senator Brown's office have participated a lot, and Senator Brown's office often sends me updates and things of how he's been involved in the local food and agricultural business industry. And I think that that is just a step in the right direction and a very good thing to have them on board with us. And I look forward to hopefully continuing their involvement with us as we move forward with monthly meetings of a local food council. I'm hoping that they will continue to stay on board and be a part of that council to help implement many more of these recommendations in this plan.
Okay, our next question comes in from Kirby. You've talked a lot about support for producers and retailers. Do you have specific plans for support for processors, and what is the economic role of processors in the county?
Shane, you can take that one if you'd like.
Yeah, a lot of the programs that we have in place, there's a lot of carryover with incentives that you see for manufacturing in the state of Ohio. A lot of those incentives, when you're dealing with job creation tax credits, enterprise zone, community reinvestment areas, you're dealing with primarily you're talking about real property, you're talking about investment of equipment and different tax incentives. Those types of food processors also, the larger processors typically are going to go into our industrial areas. The smaller processors that we're having, that we've seen and have talked to, may not necessarily go into an industrial park, but can still take advantage of some of these programs that are available through the state or even locally. We have a local revolving loan fund program for small businesses, and also a number of state tax credits that a lot of these processors can take advantage of. Being food processing is really a targeted industry for our community. That's one of the areas that we are strategically focusing on in business, in the attraction, but also the expansion. Many of the programs that you may see across the state of Ohio or most states when it comes to manufacturing, we can dovetail those right into food processing.
Great, thanks. Our next question comes in from Martin. Considering that the major needs seem to be consumer education on using fresh foods and market education on sourcing local foods, is rebuilding a local market economy a case of overcoming industrialization and farm policies that have driven growers and consumers so far apart?
That's quite the question. I guess my gut reaction right now, having been a native of Fairfield County and living here my entire life, the transition that we saw in Fairfield County was primarily the intergenerational transfer. When we lost, Dad willing to go out and pick the trees, and the son or daughter were not able to continue that because of the career choice they moved forward with. That's really when we changed things. But I can't say that there's blame being put anywhere. What those generations, when they left the farm, have been able to bring back to the community. A lot of people do move back to Fairfield County. We have a lot of great leadership that lives here, and they're native. But I can't put any finger on any industrial or farm bill policies that have really put us in the position we are today. We've really struggled to try and keep the mom and pop operations together. And sometimes they've made mistakes, and Shane can attest to some of those stories, but we still have the infrastructure, and we want to get people back in those facilities, operating those meat processing and local restaurants. But at this point in time, I think it's really just been, it's been the change, and Mom and Dad encouraging people to leave the farm, and then at that point in time, transitions are made. For my family and the farm that we operated since about 1912, it really did not become economically feasible for two school teachers, being my uncle and my father, to continue operating a 100-acre farm, and they chose to talk with my great-grandmother's nephew. And we've had that relationship now for over 50 years. It's still within the farm family, the immediate neighborhood, but again, it's it's the way things are changing.
Jonathan, I'd like to touch on that a little. A little bit of education, I think, is needed and will continue with our retailers. And when you talk to restaurant owners, and they pay a lot of money for those menus, and to say, well, I would like you to start introducing local foods and marketing local foods, well, now you're talking about changing your menu. And so how can we do this inexpensively, but also as food changes in the seasons? We have seasons in Ohio. How do you take advantage of that? And we've seen a lot of restaurants look at, local food specials, that, little advertisement that can sit right on the table, the monthly specials, but even our grocery stores. And when there is Ohio foods or even Fairfield County foods that you are putting on your shelf, how are those differentiated from any other product that is made? And how can we show in a very easy way to the consumers that, oh, you're supporting local farmers, you're supporting Ohio farms, Ohio industries if you buy these foods. And we've seen some real success with some of the grocery stores that are now really, they're beginning just very simply identify. There's an Ohio Proud program that is across the state of Ohio, but there's also a lot of little ways that you can do it, that when you're walking down the produce aisle and you see 5 different varieties of apples and one of those is grown right here in Ohio, you see that and you can very quickly identify that. And so people begin to, that if they shop at the same stores, they begin to see that and recognize that. And what we found, most people, it is near and dear to their heart to support local jobs or jobs within the state or within the region, and that they want to do that. And they may not always pay a little bit more, but if we make it easy for them to identify those foods and get to them, whether it's at the restaurant table or it's at the grocery, we want to be able to do that. And so there's been some education on the retailer's perspective as well.
I think some of this comes into convenience too, and the busy schedules that we have today, all of us, and everybody. I mean, even some of the people that sat at the table said, yeah, I like going one place and picking up all my different stuff. And so just the lifestyle that we have today has led to some of this as well. So I think that factors in.
Okay. Well, our next question comes in from Leanne. Have you incorporated any changes to accommodate ecotourism and agritourism to help farmers make money? If so, what have the efforts included?
At this point in time, our land use plan back in 2002 did also indicate agritourism was something that we needed to move forward with. As we've delved into this, that was very much part of our discussion, but the agritourism components were not necessarily creating the larger job opportunities that we might expect. The ability to aggregate and process the food is where the greatest bang for the buck comes in. But we also do have almost every one of our orchard operations and almost every one of our major sweet corn growers, they have facilities set up at the side of the road. Many of them are along state highways. And over the last couple of years, we've been trying to find grant money to move forward with mapping of those locations and potentially creating an app for people traveling through the county. We just don't have the time to do all the things that we possibly want to, but those are things that are definitely on the horizon to pick up pace on.
Okay, well, our next question comes in from Anne. Many planners may not realize that the Soil and Water Conservation District is a unit of local government, and she thinks that this is true in Ohio as well. Has the status worked in your favor in some way, or is that just a neutral fact?
I really think that the Fairfield Soil and Water Board is a local unit of government. That is a fact. But here in Fairfield County, the Soil and Water Board was one of the first boards created beyond your township and your county commissioners. And the Fairfield Soil and Water Board has always taken an active role because of our unique soils and our glaciated position between the Hocking Hills and the city of Columbus. They were one of the first voices that really said we need a regional planning commission. And since that day, Fairfield Soil and Water has been at the table side by side. For us in the Soil and Water Office, we deliver the farmland preservation programs on behalf of the county commissioners. They hold all legal authority, but we are their designated entity to do applications and monitoring and coordinate efforts. Along with our land trust, we also provide many of those same services for them. Our rapport with our agricultural community has given us the ability to talk on the most fundamental level. We can understand the challenge that they have each year, and we also have had a 50-plus year history with their family. We've seen many folks interested in farmland preservation come in the door for the first time since 1948, 1952, when we first did conservation strips, and well into their 80th and 90th years, they desire to keep that farm as productive as possible and move things forward with farmland preservation. So it has been nothing but a huge benefit, I think, to Fairfield County and even our ability to help our friends on the Pickaway County line, Perry County line, and Licking County line, that we are at the desk, we are in the office on any given day and can answer those questions.
Okay, our next question comes in from Heather. We have many small farmers markets in our county, but no coordinating organization or structure. Do you have any central organization for farmers markets, and if yes, how do they work?
No, we don't. Again, we have multiple farmers markets throughout the county as well, and they each have their own organization. I don't know if any of the other two panelists know of anywhere that has an overall organization.
I'm not aware of one, no.
There are stronger efforts moving in Northeast Ohio, I think in the Youngstown area, to help coordinate. But the folks at the Countryside Conservancy have been very integral in trying to coordinate some efforts in Northeast Ohio, but we do not have those here. Our office at the Soil and Water side has tried to communicate for the last 3 to 4 years as we saw the local foods movement coming to touch base and understand who the farmers were delivering those products in those communities, and try to open a line of communication with them that soil and water resources are not just for the large-scale grain operation. They are also available to the small fruit and vegetable production. But at this point in time, no, we do not have that central facility.
I do think, too, that as we move forward with the local food council, that hopefully we will have most of them on board, and that will be a place that they can all come together and understand what each of the others are doing. And then also one of the recommendations in this plan is that those communities within Fairfield County that do not have farmers markets, we thought it would be a good idea if we could take some of our existing markets and do just a one-day pilot program out in one of the communities that doesn't have one, to show them what it would be like to have one, to even grow more farmers markets throughout the county. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Okay, our next question comes in from Dara. Are you utilizing transfer of development rights or purchase of development rights?
We have not done anything formally. It has been something that we have talked about that we would like to pursue in the future. There is no existing current legislation that would specifically allow for TDRs right now in Ohio, and we have been working on the legislative side to promote that. And would be interested in doing something in the future as a pilot program, or working towards that if and when that becomes available.
But we are utilizing the purchase of development rights through the Clean Ohio Agriculture Easement Purchase Program and the Federal Ranch Lands Program and Grassland Reserve.
Okay, our next question comes in from Anne. You three appear to have forged a wonderful partnership in addition to a great program. Do you have any advice for others in reaching across agency lines to combine the strengths of agencies like each of yours?
This is Jonathan. Again, somebody that comes from Fairfield County. The thing that I really like about the partnership with Regional Planning and Economic Development is, for the first time in a long time, everybody seems to be reading from the same page. And we have folks that you call them the giants. You stand on the shoulders of giants that went before you. We had a soil scientist for years that said the soil here was the best and we have to protect it. We had a previous regional planning director that said, well, let's do a plan to try to protect it. And now economic development has really kind of fallen into place. Without
those pioneering folks ahead of us, the position that Holly and I and Shane have today, we would not be able to be moving forward at this level. But ultimately, we all have the support of each other's boards, and our boards cross each other's lines from the Farm Bureau level, the Soil and Water, the Regional Planning Commission, and the county commissioners. We all hear and talk the same thing. And I think without the grassroots efforts of the people allowing us to do it, we'd still have some challenges here today.
Okay, our next question comes in from George. Lisa, LESA, evaluates land with prime farmland soils in terms of the availability of agricultural support systems like supplies and equipment, as well as distribution networks. What condition are those components in, and are they addressed in the plan?
I guess the agricultural support network that you're looking towards, that really did not play into our LESA model, but we look at it when we utilize our farmland preservation programs. We do not want to move forward with protecting land that does not have the services of equipment and seed supplies, fertilizers if they're not available by other means. So we look at each farm that we move forward with the easement purchases on to make sure that they have those support networks within the immediate vicinity. Immediate vicinity would be within 2 counties because equipment dealerships cannot survive at the small size anymore. So 2 of the bigger players that we work with, one of those operations is here in Fairfield County, John Deere Equipment, but the other Case IH dealership is 2 counties away, but they are very critical, and they actually have a working relationship where red parts will come to the green parts facility and to be delivered to the local customers. And it's that type of agreement that we think is great, that they're all trying to support agriculture by whatever means possible.
I wanted to comment on the previous question a little bit. Just, when you're going out and talking to, other organizations that may not be pro-agriculture or pro-farmland preservation, is really kind of try to figure out what their hot buttons are, what is near and dear to their heart. And I think what you'll find is how to make those, you can make those connections, and just to say, if you can focus on this piece of the puzzle for us and partner with us on this piece of the puzzle, then you can begin to develop those relationships and partnerships. The other thing is when you really begin to talk to organizations throughout your community about local foods and local industry and local agriculture, what you're going to get is you're going to get people that you never thought could be a potential partner are coming out of the woodwork. And you want to take advantage of everyone that walks through that door. Every time that phone rings, you want to take advantage of those. And how do they fit into the grand scheme of things? Because you don't want to turn anyone away.
Okay, well, our last question for today comes in from Elizabeth, and I think it'll be a good place to end. Are there changes in state policy that you would like to see?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned during one of the other questions, that the subdivision regulations are something that I think that could be taken a look at further. There were some changes made at the state level back in 2005, I believe, that did help to some degree, but I would like to see further revisions to that as far as more review on smaller lot splits, because right now anything that's over 5 acres is exempt. The change that took place in 2005 was that counties could implement some limited review for things that are between 5 and 20 acres, but I think it could be built, have more teeth in it, and be a little bit stronger even at that. I also touched on before that TDRs is something that I think would be very beneficial to our efforts, and I would like to see that take place. And as far as other policies, I don't know if there's any farming, agricultural policies.
This is Shane. Yeah, there's at the state level, I think definitely looking at when you're dealing with food processing, all of the permits and regulations, looking at your state and what kind of incentives are in place to help at least go through what we see is to produce locally versus producing commercially, wholesale versus retail. The investment just to get that permit can be substantial, and how can we find some ways to deal with that. The other thing too is if you've got areas in your community you want redevelopment or infill development to occur, how hard is it to get permits? How long does it take to get a permit to where they can get their lights on, they can turn the lights on, and they can actually start making money? And one of the things that my office, we also focus on is being the project manager from the government side on this project. Because a lot of times you'll have a contractor, you'll have a project manager when you're redeveloping a site or developing a site, but there's no one on the government, the permitting agents, and that's where ED officials or other a government official can become that project manager. So when you're dealing with building code, you're dealing with zoning, you're dealing with utilities, you're dealing with floodplain, and the list goes on and on. How are those things going to where that project manager on the private side can contact you directly and say, hey, I'm having trouble with a floodplain administrator? Because many times government agents are more willing to open up to me, being just a government lackey, than it is with an applicant. And we've been able to even work through some processes before an application officially is submitted, so that application can be created in the right manner, so when it goes before a permitting agent, they've got something that they can move forward with, versus this is an error, this is an error, and this is an error, start over. It's those kinds of things that we found we've had some successes in to overcome some issues that the permitting agent, the professional, sees, but the project manager, who many times may be coming in from outside of our community, doesn't understand, may never have thought about that, and it just allows those applications to actually move in and be put in a positive motion towards approval.
Yeah, I think one of the things that gets my attention most, and I've probably been the rules of what my job description is in the soil and water conservation community, but through activities with the Ag Viability Task Force under the previous administration at the Department of Agriculture, along with our own internal discussion between retailers and producers, there are a handful of regulations and rules related to what the Ohio Department of Agriculture expects to see when they arrive at a facility or inspect, and what our local health department is looking to inspect. At the same time, there is lack of quick reference for those folks that are interested in doing on-farm processing. While we want to make sure everything is under the most sanitary conditions, sometimes we bury things in regulations so far it's hard to find. And when someone wants to slaughter a certain number of chickens on the farm and still be within the law, you have to read through multiple codes and sections, and there's all types of little what-ifs. And one of the things that I've been able to do, and again, maybe I didn't do it right and I should have asked permission for it, was seeking the permission from the Departments of Agriculture, Departments of Health, for those operators to do things. One thing that I have found is there is anonymity behind that voice in the Soil and Water Office. You can ask a question, I'll keep your name back, and I'll ask a question on behalf of some other government agency, similar to what Shane's indicating. The meat inspection department at the Ohio Department of Agriculture was really trying to figure out for quite some time why this soil and water guy kept calling. But we got on a fundamental understanding that we were just trying to clearly identify, keep people right, keep them sanitary, keep them safe, and then we briefed once the landowner or operator moved forward that this operation is going forward, and again, it's not necessarily under your control, but if you have a question, they should be prepared to answer them. There are a handful of other regulations that I think we identified, and we will be moving forward and addressing those with our state representative and senators. But again, right now, we're still moving forward, and we have to have that board voice put together by this food council.
And I just want to touch more on a positive note of those things, too, is that if we could have at the state level some kind of incentive program for utilizing local foods, too, I think that would be a step in the right direction as well. So, and with that,
and I think there is there's enough low-hanging fruit of ways to either streamline processes or educate our local growers just in the farmers markets in the state of Ohio with weights and measures, something as simple as that, and how products are being packaged and presented to customers to make sure they're in compliance with weights and measures. Little things like that that we've found to be able to communicate to our growers, educate them, so when they actually open up their store or open up their table at the farmers market, they're ready to go, and it just makes everyone much more, positive about your community, that, oh, they actually are looking out for our interests and trying to help, versus how can we stick it to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Holly and Shane and Jonathan, for a great presentation. I think everybody really enjoyed it. For those of the attendees who are still with us, if you just want to hang on for about a minute or so, I'm going to go over submitting your CMs for today and where to find a recording. Thank you again, Holly, Jonathan, and Shane.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, for those of you who are still with us, first off, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, Friday, November 30th, and then select today's webcast, Growing for Our Future, Linking Agriculture to Economic Development. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. Also, we are recording today's webcast session, so you will be able to find a recording along with a 6-slide per page PDF at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And this does conclude today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.